All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Recap, we were changing our final drive bearing on our 2006 Victory Hammer with a 100 cubic inch engine and a 6-speed transmission. So currently the engine is split, the case halves are split, the new bearing and seal are installed, and gasket surfaces are clean, and we are ready to put the two halves back together. Now, the factory recommends Loctite Ultra Black. I believe it is $5.89. This is Permatex Ultra Black that I'm using. It was what was available from the local parts house. It is the equivalent. It is part number by the UPC is 7651589. And it is listed as Ultra Black, gasket maker, oil resistant, 82180. So this is the equivalent to the factory. I've got a nice little bead of silicone on the case half. I put it on the side that's on the engine with all the rotating assembly in it, and that just to make it easier to apply and whatnot. All right. Got all the bolts in. Everything is reasonably lined up. I'm using my spinner wrench. Torque this down. The starter bolts are part of that torque sequence. So temporarily I'm going to reinstall the starter. It's nothing to take it up. That being said, again, with the bolt lengths, got to be careful, the different lengths. On the majority of your case bolts, they are one length. You do have 5 bolts that are longer than the majority, and that is these 2 here and these 3 here are the longer 5 of the majority of these bolts. Your starter bolts, you have a long starter bolt and a short starter bolt. Your short starter bolt would be the upper bolt, and your long bolt would be the lower bolt. So that should cover that. And then I'm going to just run these down. And the torque sequence on this is 2 steps in a crisscross type pattern. Now I have the exact numbering sequence in the manual. I will post a picture of that also. Should pop up here shortly if I have some success posting that. And your torque spec is going to be, let's see here, for the 100 cubic inch is going to be 15 foot-pounds on the first go around and 22 foot-pounds on the second go around, and then you're done. Okay, that is now torqued. Next thing I'm going to do is put the spring and that little, we'll call it a button, that goes behind this sensor. We're going to put that back in while it's still laying horizontal on the table to make that easier. Okay, so the spring and the button, this is what we're looking at here. That is going to go. Okay, we're going to put that spring first, then the button. There you have it. Nothing to it, but I'm sure it doesn't work without it. So, and then our sensor. This is the sensor that's going to go in there. Again, I don't know if this is a neutral safety sensor or if this is a speed sensor. I believe it's the neutral sensor, but I'm not 100% on that. So, and to install that, you should be using the 2 smallest bolts you have, which have 7mm heads on them. These are the bolts for those. Okay, and you should have a bolt with an 8mm head. It's going to hold that harness on, depending on what year, whatever. Maybe that changes, but for my application in the 2006, that's what it takes. So we're going to do that. We're going to snug those up and move on. Okay, so we are going to put the primary side back together. We have the starter drive, I believe, cover removed. We have our starter drive gear, I believe. That is the name for it. I'm going to just kind of tuck that in there and leave it loose. I'm going to put the crankshaft gear on, and this gear is going to, it's timed with our balance shaft. It has a keyway on it, so there you go. Again, just leave that loose for the moment. These are 6mm Allen heads. Grab our next sprocket. On this next sprocket, there are two timing marks here. And you can see I've marked this in yellow as well. Those are going to line up together. But first, there are 4 springs that need to go in this that have come apart on me. I removed it the first time because I didn't know that they were there. Springs are in, they hold in on their own on the thicker side of this gear. So, and again, line this and this up like so. What I should have did when I took this off is I should not have removed the snap ring, and I most likely would not be fighting this right now. So I'm going to put the snap ring on first. Okay, so I have this together, but again, you notice these are not quite lined up, and that is what we're going to use this hole for. Okay, so we've got this on, but this outer sprocket is not lined up, but we are timed on the back sprocket, and I can see that through the gear teeth there. What I'm going to do now is take a 5/16 bolt. We're going to put it in this hole, got a little bit of slack, put it in through the other hole, and I'm just going to leverage it forward and down. That'll collapse those springs, line this up, and there it is. So that is all lined up and timed. You can see clearly those yellow marks. You have the forward side. There's one mark in between the 2 marks on the middle gear. Next we have the rest of the compensator. That does not appear to be timed. As I showed in the first video, on these washers, if you don't know, these 4 washers fall out on you, these spring washers. You can refer to that video for the proper order of that. Put that on. I have that set there. Before we put a torque wrench on the flywheel or the torque compensator, show you, so the lockout tool that you're supposed to use, basically you can just use a 5/16 bolt. If you look in there, the counterweight of the crankshaft is right there. It's also used for the timing procedure. You can slide this in there like so. Now the engine will not rotate, and you can torque things down. So the torque compensator, 30mm nut and 30mm socket, is torqued to 125 foot-pounds. I've already done that, but you get the idea. So I've torqued this down, it stays in place nicely with the lock tool installed. Just so you know, according to the owner's manual or the service manual, I do want you to replace this nut anytime you have it off. I'm not going to do that because I didn't know that and I didn't order a new one. I don't see anything special about this nut. It's not a locking nut that I can tell. It has a nice heavy lock washer behind it. So I did not replace it. You may want to. For me, I'm okay with that. I think it's going to be just fine. These number 6 Allens are 30 foot-pounds. Okay, that's torque. Next, I'm going to put the starter drive gear back together. This is the pin you want to put in. Again, I just used a bolt. This is just a bolt out of holds the crankshaft position sensor in. And that's all that there is to that. I'll take this bolt back out. We'll put the rest of this together. We're going to put our one direction bearing in here, or like I like to call it, a sprag. Again, on the disassembly, I have marked this, what side goes out here and here. Takes all the guesswork out of it. I'm hoping this just slides right back in just as easily as it came out. I hope. I'm just kind of walking around and giving these a little nudge inward. And there's that. Next, we'll put this on, lining up these teeth. There's that. This washer goes on. This snap ring. There's that. Check. Looks good. Seated. Okay, so we'll put our flywheel back on here. And this is a 15 millimeter socket. And again, 75 foot-pounds. So next we're going to do our clutch basket. Does not appear to have any sort of timing marks. It should be neutrally balanced, I would assume. There we go. Now it's in. Doesn't need to be forced apparently. Got a flat washer and your lock washer. And again, 30 millimeter nut. nut and 125 foot-pounds again. So it's 125 foot-pounds, same as the torque compensator. Okay, so we've got the majority of this back together. There's one thing that needs to go back on, which is our throwout bearing in the shaft. And then, of course, the primary cover has got to go back on. I'm not going to do that right now, simply because I want access to this bolt for timing purposes. Okay, so we're going to put the front cylinder on. I have cleaned all this really well already. I'm going to put just a drop of sealer, same sealer we used on the crankshaft halves. Just a drop where the seam of the two halves meet. Just a thin amount, the front and back of that cylinder. We're going to put our cylinder gasket on. Right now I've already cleaned the gasket surfaces and wiped the cylinder clean and re-oiled the cylinder. And the rings, I have checked to make sure the location of them is reasonable and they haven't moved terribly on me. Now, if I remember correctly, Bottom of this bore is tapered. You shouldn't need a ring compressor. Just come down here and just with your fingers lightly compress the spring. Okay, so the forward cylinder is on. Quick little blow job. You got head gasket, part number 5249360. And it would appear it only goes on one way. Front cam and rocker assembly. And that's the front cylinder. So I'm going to repeat the procedure for the rear cylinder, and then we'll go through how to torque and what the torque spec is on the cylinder head bolts. On the cylinder heads, the 15 millimeter nuts, there's 4 15 millimeter nuts, and down here there are 2 13 millimeter nuts. So first you want to torque the 15 millimeter nuts in a staggered pattern. You're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and at 22. So let's do that first. Now once those are torqued, we're still not going to do anything with the 13 millimeters yet. We're just focusing on these 4 15 millimeter bolts, or nuts rather. Now I want you to back them off completely. This time, on the second go around, they want 40 foot-pounds of torque. Okay, now they want you to go around the third time at the same torque at 40 foot-pounds. And then that's going to be it for the 15 millimeter nuts. So those are torqued, and finally on the 13 millimeter nuts they want 18 foot-pounds. We're going to back our torque wrench off to 18 foot-pounds. Okay, so that's the rear cylinder head. The procedure is the same for the front cylinder head. So I won't bore you with that. I'm going to go ahead and torque that down, and then we'll address the cam timing, I believe. Okay, so on the cam timing, we still have our lock tool and the forward bolt hole. There's 2 bolt holes down here, 5/16. The forward one is for the rear top dead center. We have our cam lobes facing down, and this little mark facing up. Again, I'll go back and I'll cover, you know, once this is all in time and set, I'll go back and show you all the marks and how they look, just to make sure you get a good clear shot of it. But we're going to put the aluminum guide in the back first. And just finger start this bolt. Then I'm going to do this front guide, which is the plastic one. Make sure I get those tabs lined up. Okay, that one's in. That one I'm going to leave the bolt out so I have some movement here for the chain. Timing chain, your 2 marks need to be parallel with the deck, the cylinder. I believe Should I have this where it needs to be? I may be a tooth off. I'm going to check that in a minute. Just want this top bolt finger tight because obviously you're going to have to tighten the bottom, put the bottom bolt in, but we're going to have to rotate the engine in order to do that. We'll do that a little bit later. Say I'm probably right in the center of that. Put the guide bolts in on the bottom. Now, all of these timing chain guide bolts are torqued to 100 inch-pounds. Camshaft sprocket bolt, we just had this upper one in right now. We're going to torque that to 120 inch-pounds. That's that. Okay, now I need to put the rear tensioner in. This one is hydraulic as well. Also, guys, I know I said we were going to do the valve latch adjustment. I didn't realize these lifters and these valves are hydraulic, so there's no adjustment needed on those for just a basic removal installation, as well as this. And on the rear and the front tensioner for the timing chains are different, and the front is not marked, but the rear is marked with an R. We're going to just put this in. And I do believe it's 75 foot-pounds. Honestly, I'm just going to hit it with a big wrench and call it a day. Should be plenty good. This is all set up now. So there you go. I'm assuming the F is for front and the R is for rear. Not sure if it's the same sprocket for each one or what, but you can see there's a mark and your camshaft is marked rear. That center mark is lined up with the center mark on the cam, and the camshaft sprocket is the same. Our two marks here and here are parallel with the valve cover surface on the cylinder head. And here is our lock bolt I was talking about. You can now remove that. It's a little bit stuck. I'll have to jiggle the crankshafts to get it out, but then we're going to have to reposition the engine now to time the front cylinder. Okay, so I went ahead and I put this cover and the valve covers back on, both of which use a 5mm Allen head bolt, and they're all torqued to 85 inch-pounds.
And just like that, spikes all back together and ready to go. It was pretty effortless to put back in, right? So we got busy at work here. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to record that. The only other thing that I left out that I wanted to include was the torque spec on the final drive nut. That's the 48mm drive nut. That uses 262 Loctite, the red stuff, and 180 foot-pounds of torque. And again, put it in gear, put that lock bolt back in your crankshaft, and you're all set to torque that down. If you haven't already and you want to, please subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.